Hey there, extra historians. Welcome to Lies, the part of the show where we tell you all the things we left out, the stuff we got wrong, and all the upper Canadas we lowered. Hey, I'm Rob. I'm the head writer of Extra History, and I want to talk to you about the Invasion of Quebec, which, if you say it at a party, make someone make an excuse and go away really quickly, but if you say it on YouTube, sometimes you get a literal gold plaque. But let's get into it. First of all, I wanted to say Lies is made possible by our patrons. Thank you so much. Thank you for choosing this series. It was a really cool one. I've been wanting to do an American Revolution series ever since I started as head writer 6 years ago. This is the first time I really got to do one, so thanks for letting me go off on American history for 6 weeks. It's really cool. I also really wanted to say thank you so much. All of you who backed our History Happens Every Day calendar is going into production. The Kickstarter was a big success, and I'm just really excited for all of you to get your hands on it and for me to get my hands on it after working on it for so long. Recommended reading for this series is Benedict Arnold's Army, the 1775 American Invasion of Canada During the Revolutionary War by Arthur S. Lefkowitz. Voices from a Wilderness Expedition, The Journals and Men of Benedict Arnold's Expedition to Quebec by Stephen Darley. Through a Howling Wilderness, which is an amazing title, by Thomas A. Desjardins. Quebec, 1775, The American Invasion of Canada. Yeah, that's an Osprey book written by Brendan Morrissey. Wonderful, especially for its maps and illustrations. I mean, if you know Osprey books, you know how good this is going to be. So I'm going a little fast because the last take went a little long because I have so much to say. First, I wanted to say a little personal note. I had not seen Matt since 2018. We've had a whole pandemic since then, and I've had 2 kids, and a lot of those things contributed to us not really being able to get together. But just a few weeks ago, I was able to jump on a bus and head up to New York City for the first time in a while, actually. And he said, like, all right, you're coming to New York. What do you want to do? And because I'm an enormous party animal and I love going out with the lads, I said, I want to go to St. Paul's Chapel in Lower Manhattan so that we can visit the tomb of Richard Montgomery. And we did.
Oh, hi, everyone. Rob and I are looking for a monument. Rob, what are we looking for?
We're looking for the Richard Montgomery Monument.
We have not found it yet because we can't identify the right side of the building. It's supposed to be right there.
It said it's on the side of the building we haven't checked.
So let's go there.
Enough.
Yeah.
So maybe it's on that side.
We'll see. Found it.
Yeah, we found it. So this is the memorial to Montgomery, and in 1818 he was disinterred from where he had been buried in Quebec with military honors and transported back here, and is buried beneath this memorial that was put up before he was ever back repatriated to the United States. It's a really cool place. Unfortunately, as you can see from the picture here, the paving in front of it was being redone, so we couldn't get close. We got to see it through a fence, but it's a really cool monument. You don't really appreciate until you go there that it's on the outside of the building, but there's sort of a stained glass behind it, and when you're inside the chapel, we didn't realize this when we were inside looking for it, it backs up to the altar. So when you are looking toward the altar, you are looking toward the back of Montgomery's monument. It's a very literal, like, deification as a martyr, almost like a religious martyr. So I thought that was really fascinating. Also, at this chapel, there are a couple of I'm not sure if they're paintings or tapestries. I forget now. But one of them is one of the early depictions of the Great Seal of the United States, which very much looks like the eagle is a turkey, which that was a thing early. People were kind of arguing over whether the bird should be an eagle or a turkey, and that a turkey was better for the New World since it's a New World animal. I did also want to say that I highly recommend going there. If you go to the World Trade Center, it is right across the street. In fact, if you remember photos from 9/11 of first responders sheltering in a church and sleeping and eating meals there, that's this church. It's also the first place that George Washington went to a prayer service after he was inaugurated for the first time. The churchyard in it is also really fascinating and full of really interesting graves and old-style colonial gravestones. Highly recommended. Patron question from Stacy Lamel. Could you please go back to 5 episodes? You're cutting out important content if you're doing 4. I understand. There's a bunch of different reasons that we went to the 4-episode format, but the biggest one, and I actually argued for this, is that we always have the possibility of going to a 5, right? There are going to be a couple of series actually coming up that end up going to 5 episodes because we feel like we can't get through enough in 4 episodes. We think that the narrative and can sustain 5 episodes, or we just have more to talk about. The good thing about 4 episodes is that I would argue that in a situation like this, 4 episodes is ideal, because we did get through the event, but then what that allows us to do is be a little flexible, because we have an extra episode at the end, either to do a 2-parter or an extra one-off. So usually it would be like we do 5 episodes, we do a one-off, which is usually a guest writer, so I can have like a little bit of a break and I can film Lies, and then we go straight into the next series, right? With 4 episodes, we can do things like doing a 2-parter on Benedict Arnold that continues some of the narrative from the series we've just done. So we don't say like, we should totally do an episode about Benedict Arnold. Maybe we'll do that sometime, and then we don't, or we do it 3 years later, right? That's kind of happened before. This way, we can have our Invasion of Quebec series. We can immediately do our Benedict Arnold 2-parter. So that, the 4-episode format opens up some flexibility like that, and we can still go to 5 episodes if we really need to. And also, it opens up some 2-episode possibilities for when I want to do a really long-term wish list project, which we have a couple coming out. Some as sponsored episodes, some as full series. The long and short of it, there are other reasons for it that involve YouTube and algorithm and like all that kind of stuff and viewership. But to me, the main thing that is good for it, and the reason that I wanted to do it, was that it keeps us a little more flexible, and it allows us to deliver more topics and more cool stuff to you. But I understand. I mean, I feel the crunch too because I'm writing them, right? YouTube question. Thank you so much. The failed conquest of Canada is hardly talked about in American history. I'm glad you guys are talking about it. Keep up the great work. Thank you. I had a lot of fun learning about this. I didn't know very much about this. And really that shows what great advantages we have in our patron-funded model, right? Is because this was suggested by a patron. I probably would never have, this wouldn't have just not have been on my radar as something to write about. But, I saw that and went, that seems cool. Let me check out that. And, I'm reading up on it. I'm like, this is Benedict Arnold. It has Aaron Burr. It has, a battle in a blizzard and like an arduous march. Where I ended up making a bunch of weird jokes about Werner Herzog movies, which I love Werner Herzog movies. But this kind of came out of nowhere for me as well. It just was not on my radar at all. But it's now I really think it's fascinating, and I'm really glad that we did a series on it. Shockingly, our Revolutionary War history and Hawaii public schools was not super emphasized beside the basics. We've talked about that before, that where you grew up in the United States really informs the kind of history that you're taught, which I think there are some good things about that. But, you do end up with blind spots, and this was one of mine. Patron question from Liz. This is a little bit truncated. If you control Quebec City, you control the whole Great Lakes watershed, and Montreal is surrounded by rich farmland and forest, working as a natural trading place. Neither city is useful without the other. This is why the Americans wanted to take Lower Canada, and why they took Montreal first and easily. In a way, taking Montreal was as big or a bigger deal than Quebec. And we didn't get into this, but there is a lot of American mismanagement in Montreal with like supplies and funds and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the reasons that Arnold ends up having a big beef with John Brown. Because it ends up like he uses Brown of like looting baggage, British officers' baggage because there's all these, there's all this stuff left behind because they evacuated the city so quickly. But also Arnold was just getting in fights with everyone all the time. We'll talk about that in a bit. YouTube question. For those unfamiliar with the little jingle at 7:40, it's the beginning of a musical number from Hamilton. Yeah, this is referring to Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy. While we're talking about Hamilton, I like making a Hamilton reference when I can. I like Hamilton a lot. I really believe that, if you have a movie or a musical or a play or a video game, probably the best you can do if you're making a historical thing is reinforce like 2 to 4 themes really well. And if you get the audience to understand like 2 to 4 themes about the period, and you don't make like any really, really bad errors that end up part of the popular consciousness, you've done a pretty good job with historical film. And overall, I think that Hamilton has kind of like helped colonial and revolutionary history more than it's hurt it. I think it's brilliant, but you do have times where Lin-Manuel Miranda has famously and openly said that he just like changed stuff in order to either make the drama hit harder or to even just get a good rhyme sometimes or a good joke. The thing about Hamilton being named after one of Martha Washington's feral tomcats is literally from British propaganda. Like that is not true, even though they say that's true in the series or in the musical is not true. But one thing that I think about all the time now, because my kids love the first 3 songs of Hamilton, they generally don't get past that, is that, you have one of my favorite, and my kids' favorite songs is Aaron Burr, Sir, and My Shot, right? And part of those 2 songs is all of these guys just dumping on Aaron Burr about like, why won't you get off the fence? Why won't you join the revolution? Why won't you? Aaron Burr has just gotten back from dragging Montgomery's bloody corpse through a snowdrift, trying to get it out from under a British barricade. Like, when you listen to that song with that in your head, you're like, man, these guys are jerks. Like, none of them have been to combat really yet. And Burr is now like a veteran of this incredibly arduous campaign with this wilderness march and these sieges and like all this grody stuff. And they're having the temerity to be like, if you stand for nothing, what do you fall for? Like, yeah, I didn't see you in Quebec. And they do mention, of course, later, General Montgomery took a bullet. When I was with General Montgomery when he took a bullet in the neck in Quebec. It wasn't one bullet. It was grape shot, and it was many. Burr was very lucky to survive. I would love to do a Burr series. He's a really interesting, very shady character. And taking him after the duel with Hamilton, which almost no one does, I really want to do that. There's a lot of stuff there. He's essentially a con man toward the end. Someone said St. Jean isn't on the St. Lawrence River, but on the Richelieu River. I had a very hard time describing this river system, actually, while keeping it under the amount of words that I needed to use. Because, yeah, like I've said before, we have 1,500 word scripts for each episode. So that something even like a paragraph describing the various locations of something along a river can get really, it can blow up the word count really quickly. But yeah, the Americans were going up the Richelieu River. There were some diversions. This reminds me that Cardinal Richelieu would be a really good topic. Episode 2, patron question from Bo Carey. I thought the Iroquois Confederacy and colonial America were enemies during the American Revolution. Didn't the Haudenosaunee call George Washington town destroyer because he greenlit military campaigns that burned 50 of their villages? So this episode is giving us only a brief window into this relationship, right? It's only what it was in 1775. The things get complicated, right, between the Iroquois Confederacy and the rebel American colonies and the British. So at this point, the diplomatic goal for really both the British and the Patriots are to keep the Iroquois Confederacy out of the war. The colonials basically thought, like, they're not going to come on our side. There were some pre-existing conflicts there, but maybe we can just convince them to not come in on the British side. And overall, in the early war, that was what the Iroquois Confederacy did. They were neutral in hoping to be on the winning side, but it wasn't necessarily clear who that was going to be, and it wasn't even necessarily clear who they were dealing with. We'll talk about that in a second. But eventually, the Confederacy couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. 4 nations joined the British, 2 joined the Americans. Actually, it caused a schism in the Confederacy. There were some attacks on colonial forces, and what you're referring to with Washington is the Sullivan-Clinton campaign of 1779. So that's a few years in the future at the point that we're talking about. But yeah, they destroy 60 villages in a punitive measure against Mohawk attacks. YouTube comment, I never really considered that the native tribes in America were appealed to because of how sparsely populated the regions where conflict occurred were. I know that the country constantly had frontiers, but it can be hard to envision that, and strategic recruitment of natives just helps show that historically. It was a really difficult choice for Indigenous people too, right? They fought on the British side. The Iroquois Confederacy fought on the British side during the French and Indian War. They were a major ally. But who they're used to dealing with are these American colonials, right? They weren't dealing directly with the British government most of the time. They were dealing with the colonists. Now some of those colonists claim to not be part of the British government. Some of them are loyalists who are still answering to the British government. And 30 to 50% of them are neutral, right? This is something we don't talk about a lot, is that 30 to 50% of American colonists were neither loyalist nor patriot. So that's a really difficult situation to navigate. And the ones that are going with the British are suddenly dealing with the British government directly for the first time, not through colonists. So yeah, they're just really between a rock and a hard place. If you want to see a little bit about this, we did a series on the Gredenhotten massacre, which kind of shows the difficulty of this position. But, it's no wonder they split, really. Someone said, loving this series, however, that's the wrong British flag. The pre-1801 flag didn't have the diagonal red of Ireland. We put it in specially so you could notice. Thank you. I should have noticed that, but I did not. One of the many reasons why Quebec didn't respond to the First Continental Congress was that, this is the letter sent to Quebec by the Continental Congress, was that, unlike the other colonies, Quebec didn't have an elected assembly. The governing of the province was controlled by the governor. Without any elected assembly, the legislative council was only advisory, and the members were named by the governor. This is why the Americans wanted to organize some kind of elected assembly in Quebec after the conquest, to have them formally join the Continental Congress, since no formal institution existed. This was a thing in the British Empire if the empire was worried about the loyalty of local people, that you would have an elected governor, or you would have an appointed governor, and you would have a non-elected assembly that advised the governor, right? Even into the 20th century, you'll see some British colonies that are still governed this way. In addition to that, so that's the big issue, right, is who is this letter going to? In addition to that, the letter was suppressed, right? And it's partially in response to this that the Catholic Church just gets super involved in this immediately, and nope, not going to happen. We just won rights for Catholics in Quebec. We are not going to go back on that now, because if the British win, then probably all of those are going to get rolled back. So understandably, the Catholic Church was very interested in preserving the rights of Catholic citizens or subjects, I should say, in Canada, and also, back in Britain, right? If you watch our Policing London series, we talked about the Gordon riots, which are because Catholics are given political rights and a large number of Londoners respond violently to that. But yeah, the biggest problem is like, who is this letter going to exactly? Episode 3, patron question from Bo Carey. Did Captain Morgan not face consequences for killing the officer under parley? I doubt even in the 1700s, killing an army officer, he was a Navy officer, while under parley was not considered taboo or not against the rules of war at the time. Apparently not. He was paroled back to the revolutionaries in 1777, fought at Saratoga, was the leader at the Battle of Cowpens, and then was briefly come out of retirement to lead troops in the Whiskey Rebellion. So yeah, not really, no consequences as far as I can tell. He also, I forget if we mentioned this in the series or not, he refused to surrender his sword to Carleton. He surrendered it to a French priest instead, who gave it to Carleton, which is splitting hairs as far as I'm concerned, but whatever. Particularly at this time, the British are really trying to treat the rebels in a way that will make it easy for them to come back if the revolution fails. There really is this idea of like, these are British subjects, we're going to win, and we want them to come back peaceably and not feel like they were treated too harshly. That starts to break down a little more over the course of the war. It's never as bad as like what you see in The Patriot or whatever, but there's a bit of a kid gloves thing happening, particularly early in the war. YouTube question, why are we invading in winter? This is a stupid idea. They kind of weren't invading in winter, right? Congress authorizes the plan in June. It's September 1st and 2nd that Montgomery and his force and Schuyler and his force cross into Quebec. Arnold leaves Cambridge on September 11th. So, they're really not invading. And remember, like, December isn't quite like the depths of winter yet. So they're really invading in autumn. It's these sieges that last so long that push it into winter. There's, it's Arnold working with sabotaged maps and boats that are not doing well, and these possibly sabotaged by a loyalist carpenter barrels that are leaky, that get all their food spoiled and rancid, and everyone's sick on the march all the time. That delays them. And they know that because of the revolution, reinforcements are going to come to Quebec. So as far as the Americans were concerned, this was their shot. Like, if they waited through the winter, they probably wouldn't be able to take Quebec. So I can't really fault them for trying to go ahead with this. It was kind of their one chance. And to be fair, if Arnold had arrived just a few days earlier, they might have done it. I don't know if they would have kept Quebec, but they might have captured it had he managed to get there sooner. Oh, by the way, fun story about that boat maker. Arnold was so upset with his work, he never paid him, and this guy just never let it go. So even when Washington has, it's Washington's president, and this guy is coming and knocking on his door, being I need money for my boats that I built in 1775 for Benedict Arnold, and he never paid me. And he never got his money, never got his boat money. So, question from Nebula that came in via Twitter. Something that isn't made clear in the story so far is why Quebec was so important, but it was also a mighty fortress to take. The geography and location of Quebec. As a Quebec City resident, I know it, but it would have been great to show. Yeah, it's a really impressive city. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful city. And it, at the time, was by far the best fortified city in North America, no question. If you go and look at pictures of Quebec, it's impressive even now. I've not been there, unfortunately. I would love to. But, I've done Google Street View up through the lanes of the attack. And even today, you look at those walls and be yeah, I wouldn't want to attack this with a musket. This seems pretty solid. Yeah, it's a very impressive fortress city, and the palace the governor's palace is wonderful. I would very much like to go. Episode 4, patron question from Hercules. At the end of episode 4, you mentioned that the Loyalists settled in Nova Scotia, and while technically that's true, the sheer number of them caused Britain to split up the colony into Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Carleton was appointed as the first governor of New Brunswick. Yeah, and again, like this starts to define the geographical split between like French Quebec and British Canada, right? You do have this geographical and cultural split between the two. And that's something I didn't want to get too into that because that gets very sensitive and complicated and detailed. And I felt like I hadn't done enough reading to really dig in too much on that. I tried to stay with what the book said on that one. YouTube question. Arnold is the ultimate example of seeing yourself become the villain after you refuse to die a hero. I have a slightly different take on Arnold. Arnold, I feel, he always had a chip on his shoulder. He was just getting in arguments with people all the time. He was always bucking the chain of command. Even after, like, you talk about Fort Ticonderoga, he's having conflicts with Ethan Allen. He's having conflicts with people who are sending him orders from Connecticut and Massachusetts. He's refusing to comply with orders. And even when he is given like respect and rewards, he's always feeling like it didn't come fast enough. It's not big enough. Why didn't I get a better promotion? Why didn't I get a better assignment? I kind of feel like Arnold was a ticking time bomb. I just don't think that there was something about his personality. It wasn't just that he was ill-treated, and it's partially he was ill-treated because he was not treating others that well, and he was not dealing well with the chain of command or with just sort of military structure in general. I feel like it was partially Arnold's personal character that led him astray, and I think if things had turned out a little bit differently, he might not have gone over to the British. But I think that the chances of that happening were heightened by his personality. The illustration 814 is slightly wrong. The region south of the St. Lawrence River is in modern-day Quebec was part of Lower Canada. Lower and Upper actually refer to the way the St. Lawrence River water flows, with the lower region being where the water flows down to east, like water going down a hill. Yeah, sorry about that. I had just something I wanted to point out with the Benedict Arnold episodes. Second one hasn't come out yet when I am taping this video, but in the first one, I give all these like hypothetical examples. Like if Arnold had died at Saratoga, you get Benedict Arnold schools, Benedict Arnold army camps, you get Benedict Arnold class of ballistic missile nuclear submarine. This is not an exaggeration because all of these things are what happened with Ethan Allen, right? If you are in certain areas, like you go to a school that's like Ethan Allen Elementary, you will see statues of him. You'll be in, Allentown. And also, if you read anything about the U.S. Navy during the Cold War, you hear about the Ethan Allen class of ballistic missile submarines, which is the first class of ballistic missile submarine. And I do deeply believe that had Arnold been killed at Saratoga, all of these accolades or similar ones would have gone to him. I think that is not a stretch to say. For what it's worth, after I did these episodes, after I wrote them, we came to the U.S. for our normal summer visit to see family, and I learned from my wife's uncle that her ancestors were related by marriage to Peggy Shippen. They're like old-time Philadelphia. So that's neat. One thing for John Andre. There's a really sad monument for him in Westminster Abbey. The fact that he was hanged, that this British officer was hanged, was really traumatic for the British Empire. People were really upset about it. And again, like they built this monument for him in Westminster Abbey. He was eventually disinterred and reburied in it. And his family was given a pension. His brother was made a baronet. And he's mentioned in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And we'll have a little bit of ghost story for our final thing today. Coming up on Extra History, Giuseppe Garibaldi unifying Italy. This is going to be a great series. If you don't know about him, you are going to want to learn about him. Nazi occultism. Oh, it gets weirder. Yeah, I just finished these. It's going to be a really interesting series. It's going to be a little different. It's a bit like the Secret Societies series. If you liked that, you're going to like this one. It's a lot of very, very strange kind of theosophy type stuff. It's not so much like, it has some like paganism stuff in it, but a lot of it is less that and more these weird kind of ancient aliens theories about like why Germans are better than everyone else. After that, we're doing a special pick that I did. So we're going to do a series that I've had in my back pocket for a long time, and I've been wanting to do for years and years. And I'm not ready to announce it yet, but I will say it has to do with Renaissance Italy, and it's going to be a lot of action. So look forward to that. Right now, we're voting on our next topic, or our next theme, which is verses. And we've gotten a lot of really good suggestions on that. I'm looking forward to seeing what is going to get through, whether it's something like the Bone Wars or Tesla versus Edison or something similar. All right, we're going to do a new segment called Pepper's Ghost Story. I think ghost stories are really important historically. It's a way that our culture connects ourselves to people in the past in a way that feels very tangible and emotional, and just acknowledges that people were here before us and they lived lives very much like ours. But in New Haven, Connecticut, which is Benedict Arnold's hometown, Benedict Arnold's ghost is reported on the town green. He seems to be looking for something. A lot of people say it's maybe he's looking for his first wife who was buried there among a mass grave after an epidemic. Maybe he's looking for his lost honor. But what's interesting is some people report that he's wearing a blue Continental Army coat. Some people report him wearing a red British coat. And I think that's just a fascinating way of remembering this really complicated, interesting man, the sort of Schrodinger's Benedict Arnold, like you're not exactly sure what side he's on. He doesn't seem to be exactly sure what side he's on. And I think that's fascinating. And I would love to see that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time with Garibaldi. Bye.
I gotta tell ya, Kuya Koi, Joseph Blame, Izzy Coin, Hunter Z, Fox Doc, Dominic Valenciana, Argalite Games, and Angelo Valenciana are just the best legendary patrons.